Hello everybody, how are you today? I hope you're doing good. Let's just remember all those who are in the hospitals and all those who are sick, all those from the household of faith. Uh, just keep everybody in your prayers. We need to be talking to God a lot. With all the problems going on in this world, we need His assistance. So just remember to pray for everybody, our immediate family. We've got one who's in the hospital from a stroke, another one's in the hospital, not doing good. And of course, we all have friends and neighbors who we are aware of, and we have family and friends who we know they have others they're concerned about. So pray for everybody. I'm going to talk about a subject today that probably won't affect many people. It should, but it probably won't. And the subject is indifferent about sin. You know, throughout the history of mankind, people have been indifferent about sin. They didn't worry about it until they were caught or exposed. Like when man was in the garden and he committed the sin, and it said they heard the Lord coming through the garden, so they went and hid themselves. Well, why? Because they were embarrassed. Why? Because they were naked. And the Lord asked them, well, who told you you were naked? Well, they found out by what God put into mankind. And so we know there they were ashamed of their sin. And throughout history, a lot of times when their sins were exposed, basically they were embarrassed about it. They didn't want the world to know. And so it was a thing that caused people to be upset. And some people have gotten to the point where they don't care about sin. They're living in sin. They continue in sin, and they kind of enjoy it. The Bible talks about those who revel in their sin and then think you might be strange if you don't participate with them. Now in Jeremiah 6:15, Jeremiah was talking about the way the sins of the people had been going, and he made this fact that these people had forgotten how to blush. In other words, sin didn't bother them to the point that, they weren't embarrassed about it. And so we're also confronted by such things as this where we don't think about them anymore. In a lot of our ways, we've been kind of sanitized, desensitized, where through various media. Remember, like 40, 50 years ago, a lot of us older people, well, and I'm not there yet, getting there, but a lot of us older people, we remember days when people who kind of had one of these wardrobe malfunctions, it would be embarrassing to them. But no, nowadays, these people in Hollywood, they just kind of force it and make it happen so they can get a little bit of news coverage. And they're not ashamed of their sins. Appearing in public with scant clothing was something that was basically reserved for certain ladies who were in certain parts of town where the men would go there. But nowadays, just look at how people dress to go different places, to graduation ceremonies, to church, to the grocery store and to Walmart. They should be embarrassed about this, but when you go along, you see how they're dressed, they don't really care. And so they don't care about exposing their nakedness or anything like that. And so, even in our world, more and more, there's more places where clothing is optional. There's a big deal several years ago about the nude beaches. And of course, I know a lot of people were excited, oh, I get to go to a nude beach, all right. But no, that's doesn't even bother people anymore. And so if it bothers you, then you're labeled a prude. You're labeled someone who's just outdated and prudish, and they don't really want to listen to you anyway. The TV has been forcing all types of sin into our living rooms as we turn on the TV, and so some people have just gotten tired of it and just turned off the TV. They don't watch it that much, or they just wait and tape certain shows, and then other than that, they really don't waste time on the television set. All right. The sad thing is that people who do these things, they don't even realize it. I mean, this is just their way of life. This is normal for them. And they don't know that they should be ashamed of either their appearance or what they are doing. And sometimes even Christian men and women kind of blur the lines. Sometimes I've seen Christians wearing T-shirts advertising booze or something else, or having language on there that was not appropriate for a Christian to have, and so that is the problem, and it is sinful. And even the Bible tells us that sin is pleasurable, and that's why people like it, because it gives them pleasure. And that sometimes it's the pleasure of the moment, and sometimes they make these choices, and then they have to live with these choices. But even though it is wrong, and people are warned to avoid sin or else face the consequences, but they also know there's so much to satisfy the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, and to fulfill their pride, many people simply do not care anymore. Even those in the church will realize, if they've been around for any length of time, the attitudes of the people have changed over the past 30, 40, or a couple of generations. What used to be embarrassing and considered a no-no, basically people just go ahead and do it anyway. And they're told, well, don't make waves, or don't bring this up, you might chase somebody away. Well, that's the wrong attitude to have about it. So in some ways, we're infected with this blight. A lot of us remember our grandparents thought it was sinful to play dominoes, thought it was sinful to play cards of any kind, thought it was sinful to get on these computers and play these gambling games and stuff like that. And so, but we've kind of desensitized ourselves. We've gotten so used to the language around us that when it comes across the TV set, it doesn't even bother us anymore. And we just kind of, oh well, that's the way society is. And so we see this stuff and we just realize it's the way of the world and try not to let it bother us. But just remember, what goes in is what's in your heart. What you fill your mind up with. I mean, when Paul talked about the fact that he's being renewed day by day, what is it being filled with? He was filling his mind up with spiritual thoughts, what we should be doing. But he was not doing anything that was sinful, and that's what he filled up his mind with. As Christians, we shouldn't be doing anything that is sinful, and we should be focusing our thoughts and our minds where it should be, on Christ. And of course, the things above. We read that in Hebrews 12, 1 and 2, and then of course Colossians 3, verses 1 and 2. And so, if we're having to see this stuff, and we have a choice, we don't have to watch it. Some people like cable TV. They get on all these premium channels, and guess what? They're not ashamed to show anything. And all these new services coming out, the Amazon Prime and Hulu and all these other things. I mean, they're since it's a paid subscription program, they don't have to follow the same standards as you find on the regular airwaves. And so this stuff continues. And if you get in there to watch it and for that purpose, then that's committing sin. You may not realize, but that's what it is. And so we're so used to the vulgarity. It no longer shocks us when we hear it. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we join our neighbors in speaking the trashy language of the streets, or the trashy language that we hear on TV, because we think, well, if it's okay to come into my house and affect me in my house, then why can't I do it out there on the streets? You know, things really haven't changed over all these years. They were a problem for the people in Malachi's day. They were a problem for the first century. It was a problem all the way back to Abraham and even before him. So what we're talking to is about is this problem. The people were so used to sin that they were indignant that the prophet would dare accuse them of sin. You know, the same thing happened in Isaiah's day. Isaiah was saying, "You're not living right." Well, what do you mean? And they did that. But, you know, in Malachi it speaks where the prophet tells them that you have robbed from God, you have cheated God, you have not served God like you should, you've been wearied by God, and with their indignation, well, what do you mean by that? And we could probably do the same thing today with a lot of members of the church. Tell them you're not doing it right, and they just get all upset about it. And the problem in Malachi's day, even if the Lord, through the prophet, listed their sins one by one, they would shake their head and deny that such is that bad. Well, it's not so bad. You know, that's what we hear from people today. You accuse them of a sin. Well, I'm not like a rapist. I'm not a murderer. I don't go rob banks and stuff like that. And they justify themselves by classifying sins. And the sins they want to commit, those sins are not the bad sins. I mean, so they justify themselves by not doing the bad sins, but the minor sins they're okay doing. You know, the problem is with God, sin is transgression of the law. Any law that you will violate is a transgression of God's law. And so we have to know that. The world glorifies sin. We know that. That's the type of society we are in. They glorify sin. You can just imagine that those people are very, very happy that the government has shut down a lot of the churches because they don't like the churches. And so this sin has infected many, and it's even including a lot of Christians have done that. They go to church, they claim the Lord is their Savior, but then they talk like trash, they talk like the world, they do things that the world does, and it doesn't bother them. And I know sometimes I have been embarrassed to witness some of the actions that these people who call themselves Christians are involved in. I mean, they display a hatred for the things of God, and they still think that they're going to get to go to heaven. Folks, you need to turn away from that. We need to set our mind on things above. We need to focus on spiritual thoughts. We need to learn the commands that God has given to us, and we need to keep the commands that Jesus gave us. And if you want to know, there's more than just 2 commands in the New Testament. There's more than 5 commands. There's more than 100 commands. There's more than 500 commands. There's about 1,000 commands in the New Testament, and the majority of those commands are still applicable to us. So got to consider that. And how you going to find out what those things are? You're going to have to study His Word. So you'll know these things. That way, you study, show yourself approved to God, one who doesn't need to be ashamed, handling aright the Word of God. 2 Timothy 2:15. So, consider these thoughts and consider that, excuse me, if you are a Christian, you have a responsibility to show a good example to others. And trying to blend in with the rest of society so they might not persecute you or leave you alone, that's making a big mistake. Don't do that. Put God first on your list and do those things that'll please Him, and God will take care of you. You don't have to worry about it. Even if you suffer persecution, God's going to take care of your soul. He's going to protect you if you'll do those things that are right. But if you join the world in doing the things of the world and what the world considers acceptable, then don't expect to go to heaven. It's just that plain and simple. Consider these thoughts, share them if you will, There's too many people indifferent about sin, and if we're not careful, we can find ourselves in the same boat. We may not be any different. So we're going to end it right here. Go ahead and share it with others, and hopefully, Lord willing, we'll see you tomorrow. All right, bye-bye for now.